Welcome to the Main Card MMA Podcast. And welcome to our very first pilot episode of the Main Card Podcast. My name is Joe Murata. This is my first podcast, and I'll just give you a little background about myself as a MMA fan. I've been watching the MMA pretty casually for 5 or 6 years now, and over the last 2+ years, have really put most of my TV watching time into watching the UFC with my wife, going to a few events, and I just truly have taken a passion for the sport of mixed martial arts, particularly in the UFC, but not limited to just that organization. I've been a fan of just about every sport there is out there, but the UFC and MMA has definitely taken over. So I want to do a podcast just to, get some conversations going in online, on YouTube, wherever this is posted, and just kind of get my voice out there for anyone that wants to listen. And if anyone wants to contact me or comment about anything or any suggestions about what I could do with this podcast and what you guys would like to hear, just let me know. But this podcast is mostly going to be about recaps of prior events. Like, for instance, tonight was UFC Fight Night 155 in Sacramento, so we'll get into that. But also future fights, any news that's going around, just about anything involving MMA. And we'll see where this develops into. But without starting off too late into this ramble, let's get into what happened tonight in Sacramento at UFC Fight Night 155. I know I picked probably the worst night to start this podcast, but it's something I've been putting off for a while. But I didn't get to see the whole card from work. Came home from work and tried to catch as much as I could. Definitely not the most stacked card, just like the prior fight night, but it was still some really entertaining fights. So just starting from at the bottom with what I saw, the Marvin Vettori, the guy from Italy, sorry for mispronouncing his names, but like I said, I'm just a fan talking to other fans. I'm no insider or anything. He fought Cesar Ferreira, and from what I saw of a little bit of that fight, because that was kind of as I was getting home, Martin Vettori looked very good, very aggressive fight. Went to decision. He won, I think, all three. Judges had it 30-27, if I'm not mistaken. But he definitely looks dangerous, and I know he said he called out Paulo Costa, but he's got a fight coming up with Yoel, so definitely think that's a big jump, especially him being unranked. But from what I saw of that fight, he's looking pretty good. I think that was his first fight since April, coming off a tainted supplement suspension. So that was kind of what I picked out of that fight. Going up to the next fight, Carl Robertson versus Wellington Turman. That fight was kind of weird because I kind of thought Wellington did more in terms of, MMA scoring of who should have won that fight in my eyes. But, I definitely see Carl Robertson getting it. I was pulling for him myself, actually. I was just a bit surprised he got the decision. I believe that was a split decision, going in favor of Robertson. But kind of missed that fight too. But the main three fights, I did get the chance to sit down and watch all of them from start to finish. Although I think between all three fights was like 5 minutes long because they were all first round finishes. So, but those are the three main fights I'm sure everyone wants to hear about. Josh Emmett gets a KO in the first round at the end of it. It was a big win for Josh Emmett because, let's see, let me pull up his prior fights real quick. Yeah, because just on March 30th. That's when he got his KO of Michael Johnson. And then his prior fight to that, his lone fight in 2018, looks like he got KO'd in the second round by Jeremy Stevens. So it looks like after getting knocked out in 2018, he's starting off 2019 with 2 knockouts of his own. Team Alpha Male had a pretty good night tonight in their home city of Sacramento. But yeah, I mean, Josh Emerson. I was going to say Emerson. I was reading Carl Robertson. Josh Emmett, I mean, he just looks so good. At featherweight, I feel like he just has so much power in that division, and it'd be interesting to see where he goes up from here, because I think he was ranked 10, and he beat Mirsad Bektik. I'm not going to pronounce that right either. I think he was ranked 12, so I mean, he's definitely a few fights away from, really getting up there to that top 5, that title fight contention. And especially with Max Holloway, being the king of that division. I mean, Max Holloway's got a fight coming up with Frankie Edgar in 2 weeks. And, I mean, I still think Max Holloway's going to retain that belt and win. But it's definitely way too early to be talking about Emmett. I did hear the broadcasters mention something about Emmett was thinking about becoming a police officer and having his friends let him and his wife come live with him rent-free so he could pursue fighting, which I thought was pretty cool to hear. Nice to see him get support so he could chase his MMA dream. And you know what? It's working. But the main thing I want to talk about for this card, I'm only going to touch briefly on this UFC Sacramento card. And I kind of want to talk about even the pay-per-view in the past and then the 2 big weekends of fights coming up. The bantamweight co-main event with Uriah Faber versus Ricky Simón. I mean, dude, that place looked like it was so electric for Uriah Faber being back in Sacramento, back in the octagon in 2.5 years. And like I said in the intro, that over the last 2.5 years is when I really started getting into watching all the events as much as I can. And obviously he hasn't fought since then. So my recollection of Uriah Faber's all through clips, YouTube videos, or back like 4, 5, 6 years ago when I would watch, I'd be like a spotty fan and watch big pay-per-views. But I did not expect him to get a finish in the first round by a knockout. I think the ref did stop it a bit early. I mean, he caught him with that right, the overhand right, and it connected on Ricky right on the temple, it looked like. So it kind of messed up his equilibrium and his balance, and he was knocked down. And then Uriah, goes to jump on top of him to try to finish him with ground and pound. And I don't think it was enough ground and pound to stop the fight, but it could have went way worse. I mean, I don't think it was really going to end well for Ricky Simón anyways, but that seemed like a quick stoppage. But good for Uriah Faber. And it just seemed weird because he mentioned something about Cejudo was calling him out, but I don't think, Dana's going to give Uriah a title shot for Cejudo. I don't think there's a chance for that. So I don't really know what Uriah's plans was, if this is just a one-off comeback because it was back in Sacramento, or if he wants to truly make a push at the age of 40. Because like he said, too, he has a lot of bantamweights in his gym at Team Alpha Male, especially Cody Garbrandt being his number one guy. So I don't think he's going to want to really think about trying to climb the ranks at this age and go for the title, because he's got a lot of his guys in front of him in that same division. But nonetheless, I mean, I was super thrilled for Faber to see him come back like that and get a finish so quickly. And then let's just touch on the women's main event for a little bit, because the fight only lasted 16 seconds with Jermaine Durandamy getting the KO over Aspen Ladd. And one thing I want to say, too, Aspen Ladd, she looked like, I don't know, like the way she walked out, she looked way too calm. I didn't see, like, her face didn't change at all when she came out to the music. And especially, maybe it was just, it was so drastic because Uriah Faber came out the fight prior, just a few minutes earlier, jumping around, getting hyped up. The crowd was going crazy. And then she comes out like 4 minutes later. So I thought that was weird, especially when she's going against like this monster of a woman in Jermaine. And yeah, so whatever. So the fight goes, and I mean, I think the first punch he hit her with was the right, and it connected right on the jaw. It dropped Aspen Ladd, but she definitely wasn't out. And as she's going to the ground, and then as Jermaine's about to follow up with the second punch of the fight, first on the ground and pound, Herb Dean jumps in and stops it. And I'm a huge Herb Dean fan. I think he is currently the best referee in mixed martial arts, especially with John McCarthy being over in Bellator as a commentator. But I don't think that was a good stoppage at all. And then that kind of goes back to the prior fight. I don't think that Uriah Faber, Ricky Simone stoppage was that great. So I think just seeing those two stoppages where it's like, yeah, I could see why you stopped it, but it just, let it play out type thing, back to back on the co and the main event. It just seemed, I don't know. I wanted Uriah to win. He gets a short stoppage, and then I wanted Aspen Ladd to win. She gets a short stoppage, but she on the losing end. But I could see it either way, for the reasons it being stopped. But it looks like Jermaine Durandamy is going to be fighting Amanda Nunes next, being ranked 1. She just beat the number 4 girl. There's really no one else in bantamweight for Amanda Nunes to fight, and I don't think she's going to be a problem for Amanda. I think the only thing that's going to make Amanda Nunes lose a fight is maybe a rematch with Cyborg, and it doesn't turn into that 45-second in the phone booth throwing hands and then catching Cyborg and dropping her. I would like to see them running it back. Cyborg's going to fight in 2 weeks at UFC 240, so I'm sure she'll win, and maybe that'll lead up to another main event or co-main event headlining fight. But yeah, that's just my quick thoughts on the Sacramento card. Didn't got to watch a whole lot of it. But yeah, I just want to actually touch on a little bit on UFC 239. I know it was a week ago, but I've been talking about it a lot at work still, and everyone online that I follow is still talking about the Ben Askren knee he got from Jorge Masvidal, the Amanda Nunes Holly Holm fight, John Jones, Thiago Santos. Luke Rockhold getting his chin broken. And then even Michael Chiesa with his domination over Diego Sanchez. And so let's just start from the bottom and work our way back up with that fight. So the first fight of that card, obviously, as everyone knows, is week old, was a Chiesa versus Sanchez fight. And Michael Chiesa just looks like an absolute savage at welterweight. I think he is going to be a big problem for a lot of people in that division. Don't know if he's a title contender, but he's definitely going to cause a lot of problems and a lot of mismatches for people in the welterweight division. He's just so big and powerful. His wrestling, just his grappling, the way he was in scrambles every time Diego Sanchez was trying to scramble out of something, it always seemed like Chiesa was in the better spot, and he was always pushing the pace of the fight. And then with Rockhold, I think it's time for him to retire, honestly. Jan Blachowicz, he's a good fighter. He's a top 6 light heavyweight fighter in the UFC, but it's not like he got knocked out by like Johnny Walker, although he's not even ranked that high. But you can understand if he gets knocked out by someone like that. I just don't think light heavyweight's for him. Middleweight was his division. Light heavyweight, you're fighting guys much bigger than middleweights. They're carrying more weight, more power. He might not be used to taking that. The Jorge Masvidal, Ben Askren. We could talk about that 5-second fight for 15 minutes, but everyone's already heard about it. I did just see Ben Askren recently said too. He even thinks. I guess you can't say anything now. He can't say anything now about it. Is that he said he still believes Jorge probably would have won the fight even if he was able to use grappling, if he didn't get finished right away, which kind of sounds like a humbling thing just to say because he just got his head knocked off. But I like to see who Jorge matches up with next. I don't think he's getting Kamaru next. But, you got, in a week or two is the Lawler-Colby Covington fight. Kamaru's getting ready for an injury, or trying to heal from an injury. Tyron Woodley's still there. Rafael Dos Anjos is fighting this upcoming week, so we will get into his fight. Let me pull up this real quick. Yeah, he's facing Leon Edwards, which I think is going to be a very good fight. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Leon Edwards, although I will say I think Rafael will get that win against Leon Edwards because I just got to go with the vet over the young guy that's on the rise. I'm just more partial to the people with that lifelong career achievement award. But Jorge's, I mean, he's on a tear, and it seems like he just wants to rip everyone's heads off with what he did to Darren Till and Ben Askren. So it's kind of excited to see what he's going to do next. Amanda Nunes, we kind of already touched on her knocking out Holly Holm. I think just like Rockhold, she probably should be looking into retirement soon. She's been, I feel like she just always gets these title shots because there's really no other females there left for anyone to fight for these champions. And it's like she's got that name. She's a former champion. She is very good. It's just when you always get matched up in these title fights against the Nunes and Cyborg and stuff, and you lose, it's just, you hate to see it, especially with that, the head kick, too. I mean, that was pretty vicious. I don't think it was as bad as when Valentina Shevchenko got Jessica I the other week with that head kick. But nonetheless, Holly Holm's 38, 39, I think. So she might need to be looking into retiring herself. And then my thing, too, Jon Jones and Thiago Santos. So this is my main thing I wanted to touch on. I was going to start this podcast last week, but I didn't. I got around to it today because I myself am a super Jon Jones fan, but I am not going to be biased about anything regarding him. That's my number one fighter. The first pay-per-view that I got to watch when I was just like I said, I was watching pay-per-views here and there was Jon Jones versus Rampage Jackson. I went to the bar with two coworkers. They were both telling me, hey, man, this Jon Jones kid, this young kid, he's so great. And I was just, I didn't know anything about the UFC at the time. And I just knew the name Rampage Jackson. It's like, no, man, Rampage is going to get him. And then Jon Jones just dominated Rampage Jackson. And then from that night, it just became me into a believer of Jon Jones and just became a fan. But a lot of people are just talking about, Jon didn't do nothing to win the fight. That was a boring fight. And sure, as you're watching it, it's not what you wanted to see, especially with Thiago with his knee injuries. That definitely slowed down Thiago. And it seemed like Jon was trying to play that counter game. I know he was pressing Thiago to the fence, but he wasn't really throwing much unless if Thiago would throw something. He would get out the way, then try to throw something back at him. And with Thiago's knee injury, it kind of held Thiago back from actually being able to advance and truly put that pressure on Jon that Thiago wants to. And I think that kind of led itself into Jon Jones also not doing anything. I'm not going to say do anything because, it definitely was striking. But Jon Jones said, too, in the press conference that he was going against a black belt in Muay Thai and he wanted to out Muay Thai him. And I mean, if you go by, the numbers and just the advancing, the pacing of the fight, Jon Jones won that fight, whether people want to hear it or not. Thiago definitely looked better in the fifth round, but slightly. First round, Thiago slightly won. But the other 2, 3, 4, the middle of the fight, when Thiago, he got dropped once or twice, if I remember correctly. I know his knee had a factor into that too. But every time Thiago would have these little outbursts, once a round, he would kind of break out from the corner of the cage and just throw 3 or 4 big haymakers with his hands. And the crowd like Jon Jones is about to get clipped. But then when you look at it, none of them really hit him. Jon Jones puts one hand up by the face and the other arm he kind of Heisman stiff arms out and just keeps stepping back, and nothing really connected on him. And I think a healthy Thiago would be a big problem for Jon Jones. I really like Thiago Santos. I think at light heavyweight, he is in a much better weight division than middleweight. Maybe the weight cut had to do a problem with his because he had the power at middleweight because he has the power at light heavyweight. But, those weight cuts can deplete these fighters, and Thiago's already a pretty big guy. But I'm worried for Thiago's career just going forward in terms of his health. I think he's 34 or 35, and I mean he tore every CL there is, ACL, PCL, MCL, like everything. And I mean, you'd have to think that's a year and a half recovery, like from the surgery for that. I don't know where he'll be by then, let alone the state of the light heavyweight division if John Jones does look to go up to heavyweight to fight DC, assuming DC beats Stipe. I don't know if John Jones will go up there to fight a Francis or a Stipe. I know he said he's open to it, but I think the UFC particularly would be reliant or wanting DC to win that fight against Stipe, and then that would set up John Jones in DC's number 3, but this time at heavyweight for DC's final fight. That's probably the biggest money fight for the UFC, for the fighters. It'd make the most sense with their history, even though John Jones is, I think it's the 1-0 contest, but I mean, he's 2-0 against DC. But this time it'll be at heavyweight where, DC doesn't have to worry about the weight cut. He doesn't have to stress about that, and then he carries more power into the heavyweight division. But also, I think John Jones would do the same thing. So another thing to take with the John Jones fight, too, is that was the first time I really seen someone really truly attack John Jones' legs the whole time. And that was the first time I think I've ever seen John Jones in a fight, other than maybe that Gus fight, the first one with Alexander Gustafsson. But John did say he didn't prepare for him, and I kind of took his word for it. But that was probably the first time I saw John Jones actually being like, I could see him losing. Like every other fight, going into it or even during it, I'm like, I don't think anyone's on his level is going to beat him. But the way Thiago was attacking John Jones' legs, it opened up the idea of I could see him losing, which is kind of crazy because, his one loss against Matt Hamill and the DQ loss he had years ago, very early into his career, before he was even a champion, and that was during a fight where he clearly was just dominating Matt Hamill with just a rule of striking a ground opponent with like a knee or elbow or something, which got him DQ'd. But nonetheless, that's my quick take on UFC 239. So just wanted to go over to UFC 239, the prior pay-per-view, the little bit of the UFC Fight Night 155 in Sacramento, with Uriah Faber being the main event. That was the main thing I wanted to watch. Going into the fight night, that was literally the only fight I really truly wanted to watch. I was like, I just want to make sure that I'm at the TV by about 9:30 tonight, so I can catch the Faber fight. I just ended up watching as much as I can, so I almost watched the full main card, like I said, but I was in and out, walking around the house. But yeah, let's touch on just what's coming up these next couple weeks. I'm going to plan on doing these podcasts every Saturday night or Sunday just to follow up whatever event was that Saturday night. And then also maybe if this, gets some feedback and stuff, maybe we can do a podcast in the middle of the week on like a Wednesday. But we'll see. This is just the pilot episode. I could do a lot of different things with this after I hear this back myself and getting your feedback on what you'd like to hear, how I should set it up. Is my pacing bad? Like, I don't know anything what I'm talking about. I'm just a fan of the UFC. This is just like equivalent to if you're at work and you're an NFL fan, you're talking to a couple buddies at work and you're just debating about the NFL. But there's plenty of content for that. For MMA fans, there's content out there, but you have to go looking for it. So this is just a little bit more stuff to talk about. And I'd like to hear what other people think about fights. Was I wrong, right? What do you think? But yeah, so let's get into just what they're advertising for these next two weeks. So the next week on July 20th is UFC on ESPN 4. I don't like how that's said. It's the fourth UFC on ESPN. It's on ESPN. It's not on no ESPN 4 channel. It's just called UFC on ESPN, and then it's the number 4 event. And let's see what we got on the card. Yeah, so that's the Rafael Dos Anjos versus Leon Edwards fight. The co-main event, Walt Harris is fighting Olenek. The third fight on the card, Greg Hardy versus Juan Adams. The UFC will not stop pushing Greg Hardy. And I get it. They're under the ESPN deal. ESPN people are generally NFL fans, because that's their number one sport they talk about on ESPN. So they've recognized Greg Hardy, but, I mean, at what point do you just stop, he's fighting ahead of Dan Hooker versus James Vick. I mean, how is that higher up on the card? I know James Vick's, coming off that loss. I think Dan Hooker's coming off that loss, too, against Edson Barboza, where he got destroyed by kicks. I have never seen someone get annihilated by kicks as bad as Dan Hooker did. Unless if he fought one more fight more recently, but I think that was his last fight. But that should be a good one. Like to see how both of them can bounce back. I'm going to get the right in front of me so I could see James Vick and Dan Hooker. I just want to make sure because, Dan Hooker's last fight was December, Edson Barboza, where he got KO'd with all the kicks. And then James Vick's last fight, it was that Paul Felder fight. I didn't know if he had a fight that was more recently than that. But, Paul Felder fight was in February, and Felder looked really good in that fight. Alexander Hernandez is fighting Francisco Trinaldo. Alexander Hernandez, he hasn't fought since that Cowboy Cerrone fight, right? When Cowboy was on his tear before he ran into Tony Ferguson. Yeah, so that's a good UFC card. When UFC puts it on the main, when the UFC is not on Plus, it's on ESPN. It's they're gonna put as much as they can on it. They're trying to get all those people that's just flipping through the channels, watching ESPN, and they see these big names, high talented fighters, and try to bring in more fans to the sport, which I'm all for. Everyone I work with, they all know I talk about the UFC nonstop. And I don't think they really care to hear it, to be honest. And then next week not next week, July 27th, the week after next, is the Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, and Chris Cyborg, Felicia Spencer fight card for the main and co-main. Both featherweight, women's and men's, respectively, are up for grabs. And as we get closer to that fight in 2 weeks, or next week rather, because 2 weeks the fight will be over by the time I record a podcast, I definitely think Max Holloway is going to beat Frankie Edgar. I was at the UFC in Atlanta, UFC 236, where the Max Holloway-Dustin Poirier fight, the Gaslam Adesanya fight, and just seeing Holloway versus Poirier. I didn't know who I was pulling for. I think I was cheering more for Holloway just because, I don't know. I liked both of them. And leaving that event, I have nothing but just respect and love for both of those fighters. And I hope Holloway and Poirier, even looking down a month later, sorry, my phone forgot to turn that off, can get the win. That's about it. About 30 minutes in. We're 28 minutes in, so I'm just going to do a little 30-minute podcast to start these things off and kind of see how the audio quality is, if I need to change anything. For now, I just want to close with these words. These are my first podcasts I've ever recorded, just on my computer. It's about 2 a.m. here at my house. My wife's sleeping, but just wanted to, just kind of see how this goes. And if you guys have any, constructive criticism about the audio content, what should I talk about? What, should I have little segments? Should it just keep this just free-flowing form of talking where, I just kind of break down a little bit of what I saw the fights? I promise next week I'll have more in-depth analysis of the fight rather than, I only saw a little bit of that fight. Oh, that was a crazy KO. I'll try to break it down. But I'm not a journalist, so if you're looking for that, there's plenty of content out there. I would just like to, just kind of give my 2 cents on everything, what I'm excited for, what matchups I think is going to be interesting. Anything in the world of outside people not in the octagon, but any MMA news outside the octagon we can discuss. So I just want to get that out there. So this is a podcast generally for just a casual MMA UFC fan, by a UFC fan. And with that, thank you guys for listening to the first episode, the podcast of the Main Card MMA podcast. And thank you once again. My name is Joe Murata, and I'll look forward to hearing from you guys next time. Thank you.